The leather creaked, and the silence of the chamber was heavier than stone. A boy, no older than 20, shifted nervously, but he could not escape what he was sitting on. His father's skin. The throne of justice in ancient Persia was not carved from cedar, nor polished with gold. It was upholstered with the flayed remains of a corrupt judge, his father. The message was simple: justice in Persia was not about mercy. It was about memory. A son replacing a father, his every verdict weighed against the ghost that wrapped around his seat. That was their law. That was their order. You think you know cruelty? No. What Persia built was something far more dangerous, a system of control where horror became holy, and terror became tradition. This is the world they never told you about in history class. A civilization praised as enlightened, where the first charter of human rights was written, and poetry flowed like rivers through their empire. But behind the verses and the philosophy lurked something darker. A system where fear was engineered, not just felt. Where psychological control seeped into bloodlines, into rituals, into the very bones of the dead. You see, in Persia, death was never private. It was spectacle, it was law, it was surveillance. They had mastered a form of punishment and purification that erased not just a man's life, but his legacy. Imagine being condemned, not only to die, but to be dissected by priests, by vultures, by flames of cosmic judgment, and then to have your children carry that stigma forever. This wasn't random cruelty. It was structure. It was designed. Persia believed the body was dangerous after death, tainted, a vessel of corruption. To bury it in soil would poison the earth. To burn it would insult fire, the sacred flame. To drown it would contaminate water, the lifeblood of the empire. So they built towers of silence, high stone platforms where corpses were left for the birds. And here's the truth: the vultures were not just scavengers. They were judges. Priests studied their choices, their appetites, declaring who was pure and who was corrupt based on how fast the flesh was stripped away. This wasn't religion. This wasn't law. This was something darker, the perfect fusion of both. And it worked. Because when every man knows that even in death, his body will become a message, fear becomes eternal. At dawn, the sky over Persia's desert turned crimson, not with fire, but with wings. The vultures already knew. They circled the stone towers where the living delivered the dead. Below, silence ruled. Not a single wail, not a single tear dared escape the procession. Sound itself was forbidden, because sound meant impurity. A family walked in silence, covered in white cloth, eyes downcast, carrying their dead. A merchant, a soldier, a child, it did not matter. In Zoroastrian law, the instant breath left the body, it became filth. It was no longer your loved one. It was corruption, a magnet for demons, a danger to the order of the world. And so the body was stripped. Clothes removed with hooks. Flesh exposed to the desert air. The bearers, men damned to impurity forever because they handled corpses, laid the body in one of three circles. Men on the outside. Women in the middle. Children at the center. Always naked. Always face up. The geometry mattered, it was cosmic. The outer circle, protection. The inner, vulnerability. The center, innocence devoured first. And then the wings descended. The shrieking, the tearing, the frenzy of beaks and claws ripping away the face, the eyes, the chest. In the heat of Persia's sun, flesh melted under the bird's hunger in less than an hour. You want to believe the family turned away. They didn't. In fact, in many cases, they were forced to watch. Mothers, especially, were required to stand upon designated platforms as their children's bodies were stripped, told their grief itself was guiding the child's soul into paradise. Imagine that weight, to believe your crying eyes determined your baby's eternity. This was not mercy. This was psychological warfare disguised as cosmic law. And it did not end with the flesh. Once the bones gleamed white under the sun, priests swept them into pits of lime, dissolving them into nothing. No grave, no tomb, no marker. You did not belong to your family anymore. You belonged to the system. But the darkest truth wasn't the vultures, nor the bones, nor the silence of the desert. It was the power of interpretation. Priests recorded the vultures' choices like scripture. If a body was devoured quickly, the soul was pure. If the birds hesitated, if they avoided the flesh, corruption. Imagine waiting for days while your loved one rotted, knowing the priests would mark their soul as tainted, and your family's name with it. This wasn't just death. It was erasure. It was judgment designed to fracture families, to keep bloodlines obedient. You see, most people think of rituals as faith, gestures toward gods, symbols of devotion. But in Persia, ritual was weaponized. Every movement, every silence, every shadow of the Tower of Silence was not about worship. It was about obedience. It was about conditioning the mind of the living through the terror of the dead. Think of it. What greater tool of control exists than convincing a man that even after his heart stops, the state still owns his body, his legacy, his very soul? Persia mastered that. And they wrapped it in the language of purity. The earth must not be contaminated. The fire must not be dishonored. The water must not be poisoned. But beneath the surface, the message was simpler: you do not belong to yourself. Take the case of Judge Sisamnes. When King Cambyses II discovered he had taken a bribe, execution was not enough. The king ordered him skinned alive. His flayed hide was stretched and stitched into the seat of judgment itself. His son was forced to sit upon that flesh, to dispense justice with his father's screams stitched beneath him. That was not just punishment. That was programming. It carved fear so deep into the judicial system that every verdict carried the memory of blood. Do you see? Persia was not just punishing corruption. They were manufacturing a theater of horror that embedded obedience into institutions. Judges did not fear law. They feared memory. Soldiers did not fear defeat. They feared dishonor that would echo into the afterlife. Mothers did not fear loss. They feared watching their grief become the guiding force of their child's eternity. This was psychological architecture centuries before psychology had a name. The brilliance, and the horror, was in how Persia made death a public script. The vultures were not just scavengers. They were stage actors, and the priests the interpreters. Every citizen, from the wealthiest noble to the poorest farmer, saw their fate not just in the flesh of the dead, but in how the empire narrated it. Quick devouring. Purity. Delayed. Corruption. And the whispers spread like wildfire. Did you hear? His body lingered. The birds would not touch him. What sin did he hide? Suspicion infected families. Shame became hereditary. And that, more than swords, kept the empire intact. Because fear of death is nothing. Fear of memory, of what your children will inherit from your sins, that is eternal slavery. Purity. That was the word Persia draped over its cruelty, the mask covering its machinery of fear. To the priests of Zoroastrian law, existence itself was a battlefield between order and corruption, between light and shadow. Every ritual, every punishment, every silence was justified as protection of Asha, the cosmic truth, the divine order of the world. But ask yourself, who decided what was pure? Who defined corruption? The priests. The king. The same hands that flayed judges alive and stitched them into furniture. It sounds like religion. But look closely, it is governance. Control dressed in sacred fire. They taught that the earth was sacred, so no corpse could touch it. They taught that fire was holy, so no corpse could burn within it. They taught that water was life, so no corpse could sink into it. At first, it sounds noble, respect for the elements. But what it really did was force every family, every death, every moment of grief, back into the hands of the institution. You could not bury your father in secret. You could not cremate your wife in rebellion. You had to carry them to the towers, to the priests, to the vultures. The empire inserted itself into your mourning, your memory, your very last goodbye. And they weaponized silence. To cry at a funeral was impurity. To speak aloud was impurity. To touch the corpse was impurity. Do you see it? They stripped you of your most natural human instinct, grief. They turned sorrow into a sin. Imagine watching your mother or child carried up the stone steps, stripped naked, fed to birds, and being forbidden to scream. That is not religion. That is psychological enslavement, dressed in holy law. The obsession with purity created corruption of another kind, hierarchy. Not every body was equal in the towers. The wealthy bribed for prime placement, higher levels, where vultures struck first. Their flesh was torn quickly, their souls declared pure. The poor lay lower, left to rot under the merciless sun, birds arriving late, priests marking their souls as corrupt. Do you see the poison? Purity was not just about faith. It was about class. The rich bought clean souls. The poor inherited shame. And this is where you must pause. Because the deeper you look, the clearer it becomes. Persia's obsession with cosmic order was not about the cosmos. It was about control. About binding every man, woman, and child in invisible chains. And those chains are still here. Different names. Different rituals. But the same architecture of fear. Tell me, what would you do if even your death was not your own? If your last breath was not private, but scripted? If the way your flesh decayed was not simply biology, but a verdict written into eternity? That was Persia's reality. And if you think it ended with the vultures, you are blind to the pattern. Because what Persia truly perfected was not torture. It was inheritance. A system where shame could pass like blood. Where corruption was not only punished in the body of the guilty, but etched into the names of their children. When Sesamnes was flayed and turned into a seat of judgment, it wasn't just his punishment. His son lived it every day. Every verdict he delivered, every moment he sat down, his father's skin whispered beneath him. Do you see the cruelty? It was generational. It was designed not to kill corruption, but to infect bloodlines with obedience. And here is where the truth gets darker. These rituals, these punishments, these normal practices, were never just about Persia. They were about you. About men across time. About how civilizations learn to break their people not with swords, but with symbols. Not with chains, but with rituals. Not with armies, but with memory. And you, yes, you watching this, must decide something. Do you remain a spectator, or do you claim the knowledge they tried to bury? Because the deeper you listen, the harder it will be to go back. Once you see how fear was engineered, how memory was manipulated, you cannot return to sleep. If you are ready to step across the line, then mark yourself. Write it now, twice, in the comments, I do not belong to their order. Do it not just for engagement, but as a declaration. Because symbols matter. Words become marks. And once you inscribe yourself with this truth, you separate from the pattern that has trapped men for centuries. Persia's towers of silence are dust now. The vultures are bones. The priests are ash. But the system, the architecture of fear, lives on in new temples, new governments, new rituals that shape your grief, your shame, your memory. The question is, will you still kneel at their tower? Or will you climb it, see the pattern, and break free? You think the towers of silence are gone. That the vultures are nothing but fossils in desert sand. But the system lives on. It always does. Because fear is the most reusable technology ever built by man. Look at how Persia used purity. The corpse was declared impure. The family was silenced. The priests interpreted the birds, and society obeyed. That structure hasn't vanished, it has only evolved. Today, the words are different, but the power is the same. Governments, corporations, institutions, they all declare certain things impure. Certain voices unclean. Certain griefs unacceptable. They control not just your body, but how you are allowed to remember. Think carefully. When your ancestors died, they left behind graves, names carved in stone, memories preserved. But modern systems are dissolving even that. Death certificates are data points. Cemeteries are erased for development. Your history, your memory, digitized and controlled. Persia had vultures. We have algorithms. And both are judges you never chose, reading meanings into your existence that you cannot escape. Consider shame. Persia engineered shame into bloodlines. A father's corruption could taint his son. Today? A single mistake online, a single stain on your record, and your children inherit it. Their opportunities poisoned by your name. That is not chance. That is design. Ancient psychological control repackaged in modern skins. And still, silence is demanded. In Persia, tears at a funeral were impurity. In your world, certain truths, certain griefs, certain angers are inappropriate. You're told to stay quiet, to be civil, to obey the rituals of modern purity. To speak too loudly is to become impure. To resist is to be erased. Do you see the mirror now? The vultures never left. They simply changed feathers. They feed not on flesh, but on attention. On your silence. On your compliance. And just like the Persian priests, modern institutions interpret their behavior for you, declaring what is pure, what is corrupt, what is allowed. This is why Persia matters. Not because of their cruelty, but because they built the blueprint. They proved you can control a civilization not by the sword, but by embedding fear into death, memory, and shame. And once you see the pattern, you cannot unsee it. Imagine standing at the foot of a Persian tower of silence. The vultures scream above, the sun cracks the desert sky, and the air smells of rot. A family walks past you, faces covered, their grief chained by silence. At the top, a body waits to be consumed. But what you're really looking at is not a ritual of death. It is a mirror of power. A machine. A system designed to teach every man, woman, and child one thing: you do not belong to yourself. And if you are honest, that machine never broke. It simply changed its walls, its symbols, its language. You do not live in Persia. You live inside a modern tower of silence. When you die, your name, your legacy, your memory are judged not by the vultures of the desert, but by vultures in suits, by priests of bureaucracy, by algorithms that decide whether you are remembered or erased. You are still being consumed. Piece by piece. The Persians were brutal, yes. But they were also brilliant. They understood the secret every empire learns eventually: fear of death is not enough. You must make a man fear what happens after. Fear what is said of him. Fear what his children inherit. That is eternal control. And that is why you were never supposed to hear this. Because once you see it, once you feel the pattern, you begin to notice it everywhere. In the silence demanded at funerals. In the shame attached to mistakes. In the inheritance of corruption. In the rituals that feel natural, but were designed to keep you obedient. Listen carefully, you are not free. You are conditioned. You are bound by rituals so ancient, you think they are truth itself. And the moment you question them, the vultures descend. Maybe not with claws, but with mockery, with exile, with erasure. So I ask you now, what will you do with this knowledge? Will you walk away, pretend this was just history, just a story? Or will you recognize it for what it is, a map of control that has shaped every empire since? Persia's towers are ruins now. But the lesson they taught remains alive: control the dead, and you will own the living. And you, watching this, you have just seen through the mask. That knowledge is dangerous. Because once you see the tower for what it is, you can never go back to silence.